So let me introduce the second speaker, PJ DiPietro. So thank you, PJ, for joining us. It's fantastic to have you here. So PJ DiPietro works at the intersections of decolonial feminisms, women of color thinking, Latinx studies, and trans studies. They are assistant professor and graduate studies director in the Department of Women and Gender Studies at Syracuse University, New York. With a transdisciplinary approach, they engage anthropology, human geography, and philosophy. They are one of the co-editors of Speaking Face to Face, the visionary philosophy of Maria Lugones, and their single-author manuscript will be published under the title Sideways Selves, the Decolonizing Politics of Trans Matter Across the Americas. They collaborate with various organizations committed to social justice, including the Democratizing Knowledge Collective, the Association for Joteria Arts, Activism, and Scholarship, the Decolonial Philosophy Collaborative REC Latinoamerica, and the travesti collectives Damas de Hierro and Futuro Transgenérico. Thank you for joining us. PJ, over to you.
Thank you so very much. I am truly humbled by your invitation to join you today and to join these wonderful speakers. And I want to thank Jean, Paola, Sandeep, Sylvia, and Suraya for organizing this just amazing decolonial cafe. I am talking to you from Central New York, Syracuse. This is the land of the Haudenosaunee peoples, and they are the keepers of the land. They are part of the Onondaga Nation. And I want to acknowledge their stewardship. I'm trying to, for the sake of access, I would like to have my presentation, and I don't know if the share, yeah, it is working. Okay, great. So thank you. I'm gonna share that with you. Give me a second, bear with me, just a sec. And there, let me see. There, and where are you? Here. Here. Yes, beautiful. Just number 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this slide are probably themes that I would appreciate if you could keep in mind, in your heart, in your spirit as I read. Impermeable body, impermeable, permeable body, transgender, colonizing permeability, communal selves, decolonizing trans, interlocking white supremacist and casteist systems, and the translation of trans studies. The living witnesses of the aftermath of colonialism continue to teach us what it means to dwell in oppositional embodiments. They teach us the praxis of negotiating life from within the domain of dehumanization. Against legacies of conquest, they generate ecologies of social permeabilities, not quite human, not quite monstrous, and yet not quite animal. In the life work that I undertake, I shift my attention to this social and decolonial production of atypical and non-conforming embodiments across Latinx and Latin American communities. I follow the flesh of non-being under coloniality. This flesh is peopled, but this peoplehood does not register the neoliberal self-fashioning individual, nor does it fit into the post-human hopes of cyborgs, nor does it quietly settle in the new typicality of transgender. Within the Western hegemonies of sex and gender, the notion of transgender points to the propelling force that steers bodily orientations beyond their current limits. Trans and its permeability contest the typical reality of the subject. However, the carnal reality of non-being lacks this typicality. Non-beings lack both the modern subject's impermeability and the permeability of contemporary transgender bodies. It is key for decolonial epistemology knowledge to question the typicality of our embodiments, whether typicality materializes as impermeable, an isolated move, an individualizing move, or permeable, a proliferating move. I am drawn to embodiments placed not only beneath the human, but also beneath the animal. These embodiments offer insights on unprecedented ways of being with and becoming impermeable. And I'm referring here to the many ways in which the colonized in the so-called New World were treated as in the species pyramid as the antecedent, the pre the pre-stage of animality that deserved care. In the year following my mother's passing, my family found an outlet for our shared trauma in the advice of one of the local curanderas, healers. She was an indigenous Toba Quom woman in her elder years. She came from the region of the intermountainous valleys in the Bolivian Argentinian plateau. The slow and winding way in which my mother's vital fire had left her body made my family acutely sensitive to the precarious condition of our flesh. I did not quite get it back then, but injustice played a role in her ailing health. In hindsight, it was not surprising that, already tucked into bed late at night, I spent hours visualizing otherworldly interventions that could have kept my mother's light burning. The DeColonial has allowed me to access this repository of subjugated knowledge. It makes me more aware of the ways that the practice of summoning an intangible and auspicious elsewhere is steeped deep in indigenous philosophies. The healer's gift as fire whisperer taught us to sync our everyday life to the sacred reality of embodiment and well-being. She talked to us about habits and habituation and about learning how to read the habits of flesh, but also of clouds, winds, and shadows. They may show signs of our alignment or misalignment with nature. Her philosophy differentiated between nature and naturalization, the latter being, as some of us know, an instrument for the coupling of racist eugenics views and medical anxieties about cisgender norms. I began with this slice of a childhood underwritten by indigenous philosophies as an invitation for you to notice that there are key elements in the relationality that supports the role of the fire whisperer within the community in which I grew up. To the Western mentality, most of these elements are irrelevant. To the mixed race, brown, gender non-conforming person that I have become, these elements cross hemispheres as repositories of subordinated knowledges. The curandera, the healer, showed us that a communal inhabitation of embodiment lies at the core of an indigenous, non-Western understanding of the self. I do not think that the fire whisperer conveys her sense of the communal through the idea of having a community to lean on. Instead, she summons the communal through her practice. In fact, her family and mine did not share community with each other. She had come into our lives through a series of exchanges, bags of groceries and produce that we would bring from the town where my family lived, all the way to the healer's village, about 2 hours by car on dirt roads. She also taught us that my mother's fire demanded the practice of interdependency, which included not just the linkage between the healer and an alien patient, but also the patient's family and the clouds, winds, and shadows, and other life forms such as homemade remedies and potions. Thinking and living communally taught me to mind the social for an inhabitation of selves in relation. From within this domain of subordinated knowledges, impermeability and impressibility gain salience as a decolonial matrix for embodied possibilities. These reflections on the ways that permeability assembles communal selves and embodiments may help us understanding the relation of nonconformity to the Western hegemonies of heterosexualism and cissexism. When I was about 7 years old, a few months before my mom passed away, I found myself kneeling in front of our family's rosary. Practitioners of Catholicism use this string of beads for devotional prayers. My mother had hung the rosary on the wall of the living room. She called my dad to attend this makeshift contrition ritual. She then instructed me to tell my dad the reason behind my tribulations. I reiterated to my dad what I had earlier confessed to my mother. I had been missing for about an hour that late afternoon. During that time, my neighbor and I had gone into his father's camper, and with playfulness, we had rubbed each other's bodies. We had also caressed one another. I vividly remember this makeshift confession ritual because it felt like an emotional imprint taking residency within me. The confession was meant to suppress my experience of manyness, of an embodiment that I could no longer call my own. My performance of atonement, though, made me even more aware of the fleshy folds that since then I have failed, fortunately, I would say, to numb down. I would like to unpack this experience of manyness as a way of providing an alternative, a decolonizing alternative to trans studies. The subjugated philosophy of the fire whisperer allows me to link embodied manyness to impressibility. The latter is the condition of being affected by another. Consider, for instance, one slice in the life story of Roxana Hernandez, a stateless trans woman originally from Honduras who died in ICE's custody due to lack of proper medical attention. ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency in the US. Let us focus on the relationship that sound materialized between her, Roxana, and the neighborhood in which she lived. Sound became an integral part of the violence that pushed her to join the asylum-seeking migrant caravan of 2018. Sound remained in her embodiment as an impressible infrastructure whereby sexism perpetrated torture against her and many other have-nots in Honduras. According to the news outlet BuzzFeed, a gang with ties to the local cartel raped Roxana. During the assault, they screamed, this is a trigger warning, "We don't want you in this neighborhood, you F. The hegemon, you fucking faggot. The hegemonies of globalizing capitalism rehearse compound violence on trans Latinx migrant bodies. The violent assault occupies the sonic matter of impressibility. Both language and screen materialize the uncanny meeting of toxic fixation and transphobia. Impressibility actualized, on the one hand, anxiety about the bodily boundaries upon which sounds trespassed, and on the other, violent exhilaration about the carnal circuitry that rape corrupted. Within each of the assemblages that I have asked you to journey with me, I recognize different aspects of communal selves. The plurality of flesh that emerges from the vital fire to which indigenously healers speak, the messy play of intimacy between two kids, or the sonic circuitry between Roxana and her exile into the migrant caravan. The response to multiple oppressions is crucial as part of the decolonial method. My act of contrition before the rosary entails an injunction against the permeability of flesh. If the touch of my neighbor multiplies the carnal habituations of the flesh in which I reside, the rosary denounces the weaknesses that leave me outside the hierarchical human building binary of masculinity, femininity. Less than human, disabled, debilitated, I have learned as much as Roxana did to wear somebody else's skin, to wear many other skins. We have come to habituate our flesh to realities other than those of typical humans or typical animals. The violence that both Roxana and I face is an attempt at displacing the intimate terror that we manifest for many as reminders of what it means to slip down the non-human, neither man nor woman nor animal decline. The late Loana Verkins was a leading sex work activist. She also grew up in the Northwestern and Andean region of Argentina, like I did. She identified as travesti. Since age 12, she developed a complex account of travesti embodiments. She understood that they carried the traces of surrounding carnal forces. Hers is a way of acknowledging the fleshy impressions others have left on her, as well as foregrounding the impressions that she, in turn, has impressed on others. Quote, I had no clue who or what travestis were, but the very first time I saw those bodies in their magnificence, I already knew that I was going to show up that way, así in Spanish. I was going to become así, the way they did. Berkins resorts to the modal adverb así, or that way, when she points out conceptual and perceptual logics entangled in travesti embodiments. Randomly running into them in the street, they came to her as apparitions, permeable in their unsteadiness and captivating for their ability to attract carnal impressions. Notice also that the verb aparecer, or to appear, relates to both showing up and apparitions. It strikes me that both terms in Spanish and English point to an otherworldly domain, as the panelists, as the presenters in the other panelists suggested. Así, or that way, names biocultural faculties to impress upon and be pressed upon among embodiments that commune with each other in opposition, not only to the man-woman divide, but also the human, non-human divide. And now I am almost there. When you think about it, the travesti así that Berkins introduced works as an embodied and situated form of germination. It creates something anew by materializing interdependent impressibilities. They are not unlike the circle of embodiments that the fire whisperer taught us to foster. Within the Western paradigm, this germinating way of transing has registered historically as less than human, crippled, or monstrous. Due to the many technological and social developments that foreground the plasticity and flexibility of embodiments, the 21st century celebrates what was once understood as monstrous or physically, quote unquote, handicapped. Contemporary politics and epistemology offer this celebration to both trans and transgender embodiments. Within this Western paradigm, the coloniality of transgender performs the fusion between gender nonconforming and the near-human monstrous bodies. However, and this is the most crucial point to which I arrive, we must also notice that trans embodiments have seldom tapped into the native and indigenous philosophies, or that the Western studies of trans embodiments have seldom tapped into the native and indigenous philosophies that the fire whisperer summons. At the same time, the Western paradigm of sex and gender mistakes the ineffable mysteries of trans in flesh for monstrous trans embodiments. The biohacking age escalates the transgender monster, this is critical, to the station of human deviation. The self-fashioning modern individual rehabilitates the trans monster from the abyss of the non-human. The decolonizing epistemology that I practice centers communal selves and posits that transgender, and therefore the dominant genealogies of transgender studies, do not quite depart the human-centered paradigm of sex gender. The Western genealogies of trans studies foreground individual self-fashioning over communal selves. In opposition to these genealogies, decolonizing transgender studies entails weaving together intersectional, decolonial, anti-racist, transnational, and intercultural feminist thinking and philosophy, specifically because of the ways that they help us differentiate between A, gendering and ungendering, B, the light and the dark side of heterosexualism, and C, the monstrous deviations of the human and what I have called beneath the animal flesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, PJ, for that amazing opening up of the sensoria